This is Marketing Uncomplicated. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. I have Allison with me today, a ballerina turned marketer. She is the CMO and at Trust Radius, a buyer intelligence platform, and we'll get into what that all means. She leads marketing strategy to create a marketplace for both technology providers and buyers. With a proven track record in B2B and SaaS, she is an action-oriented go-to-market leader. I like that action-oriented. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. That builds marketing teams and programs that generate revenue. Her in-depth understanding of the customer journey, which again, guys, is an interesting one as there is a lot of change happening with the customer journey most recently, but we'll also talk about this through the conversation, combined with a data-driven approach, has given her a tech companies she has worked with and competitive advantage. So happy to have you here, Allison. Thank you so much for joining with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I wanted to talk first about what was your drive to get to the CMO role? Because, a lot of folks in marketing can either, be in one angle or the other, whether their focus is on SEO, their focus is on digital, and kind of getting great at this one piece of the pie as it relates to marketing. But being a CMO is conducting the orchestra and being that master and knowing how to pull all the levers across the board. So let's talk a little bit about your trajectory leading up to this position.
So when I think about the role of the CMO, I think that's a really great analogy, or kind of this orchestra of talent that you need to essentially move all in the same direction. And you're doing that not only with your marketing team, but you're doing that cross-functionally. So you have to really think about the go-to-market motion. You have to think about how you're talking to the product team, how you're influencing the product roadmap, how you're engaging with customers, and how that influences your overall corporate strategy. And so that's something that really, really motivates me. And when I think about the CMO role and just how important it is to an organization, and how much impact that you can have really, really quickly, that's just something that has really driven me to be a CMO, but also I think really motivates me just in general as I think about, my role within the company.
Yeah, I love this description of action oriented. Let's talk a little bit about that.
So, I always tell my team done is better than perfect. And we are, yeah. So, and I was interviewing at Trust Radius, and one of the executives on the team asked me if I was, a visionary, someone that was ruthless about kind of the execution. And there was like a third kind of like persona that they mentioned. And I was like, honestly, I am a like, get stuff done. Like, I want it out the door. I want it shipped out. Let's get it done. And I think that a lot of, marketers, because we've got this, we're so creative, and we can get that analysis paralysis, right? We want it to be perfect. We want anything that goes out in market to really showcase our brand. But I think marketers need to find that balance of, hey, if we are kind of mulling over this one thing, or, this design, the copy, this one word, I think that there's a lot of meaning to that, but also it's like, we need to get stuff done. We need to move forward. We need to learn fast and iterate. And I've just totally gravitated towards that. And there's some disadvantages of that too. I think overall it helps also empower my team, because I really want my team to feel like they own this. They are accountable for whatever piece of the marketing puzzle. But I think when you kind of have this action oriented, it really empowers your team to move quickly, learn quickly. And that's just kind of my philosophy when it comes to like that management, and how I want my team to be a growth driver.
Yeah, I like that. And you mentioned something that I think is really important, even just as a leader in general. And when we think about business owners being entrepreneurs and knowing, who they're hiring, and in essence also knowing what you need to make a good team, right? Because I think a lot of the times you can potentially step into a role, or you can be a founder where you, to your point, like we have this analysis paralysis, we want everything done, oh, I'll just take it on, I'll finish it, I'll get it to market, so on and so forth. But it's like, if you're hiring somebody, let them do the job, let them finish the job. And I think that in similarities to entrepreneurs as well as in leadership, we can have that instance where we kind of take it on to get it to the end goal. But if we're hiring somebody to do the job, I think then we got to let them do it. I love that you say that in particular, and how your leadership role is to lead that, for sure. So in essence, in terms of Trust Radius, as a buyer intelligence platform, let's talk a little bit about that kind of process, because I think it's an interesting positioning. So dive a little into Trust Radius and what that actually means.
So first and foremost, I think when we think about Trust Radius and where it fits into kind of the buyer's journey, and so, we have millions of people that come to Trust Radius annually, and they're doing in-depth research to really understand what product is right for them. And if you think about today's buyer, they're more skeptical than ever and risk adverse, and when we think about how businesses are now measured, and when people are evaluating their tech stack, you can get fired for making the wrong tech purchase. And so we really think about, okay, what are buyers' expectations? What is the information that they need to make a really confident decision? And that's really how we've built kind of like our platform, and kind of like that publisher side of the house is, okay, great. They want the number one thing that they want to know, pricing. The other, they want to read reviews. They want to get some kind of product demo that they don't have to talk to a salesperson for. And if you think about that in the kind of consumer world, we can get a ton of product information, and it's very transactional. Now, obviously, those tendencies are now transcending into the B2B world. And of course, we're not going to make a purchase, $100,000 purchase of technology without talking to a salesperson. But the role of the salesperson kind of changes as well. And so if you can, and it's a huge paradigm shift, I think, for go-to-market teams, where it's like, let's give them all this in-depth product information. Let's have them, read all of these reviews. They don't all need to be 5-star reviews, but they can understand, okay, who are the type of people that use this technology? What are the types of companies that use this technology? Then when you get people that are coming to you, or you're outbounding to them, they're just much more informed. That can accelerate the sales cycle, that can let the salesperson be more consultative and value sales to them. And so that's really our goal, is to, one, have buyers find the information that they want, make a confident decision, but then also connect those technology providers with the right audience, right? Because you don't want to just be selling churn, and you're selling the Rolls Royce to somebody that needs a Toyota, right? Because that's just going to be churn a year later.
Yeah.
And so really we're trying to find that happy medium where we're connecting buyers with the right vendors, and vendors with the right buyers.
Yeah, no, I like that, because I mean, two things I want to mention there. First of all, guys, we're talking about the B2B buyer's journey, which is very different to the B2C journey. And one thing I like that you picked up here is, most importantly, is what you need to understand in terms of your tech stack, right? Because, and going back to a car analogy, you may only need a Toyota for a particular tech stack versus a Rolls Royce, because if you buy into a Rolls Royce and you only use 10% of it, yet you're spending X amount of money that you may not get to in the next 5, 6, 7 years, then it's important for you to know. And it's not saying that a Toyota is worse off than a Rolls Royce. You may just need the Toyota to go and pick up groceries, right? So it's really kind of differentiating where you are in your business, what you need, what your marketing and sales team needs to be able to connect the dots through the buyer's journey, which I think is highly important. One thing I kind of want to dig in and zero in on a little bit more is this buyer's journey, because it is ever evolving as we change, and as new things come into the system, and how consumers are discovering your products and your services. And as you and I have chatted before, we talked about Google's messy middle, right? That they I think, was it like 2 years that they came out, and a world has shifted from then. So I'd love your perspective on the updates to what used to be a flat line in terms of the customer journey. And it still is that through line, but what is happening really in the middle once somebody basically lands on your websites and wants to discover who you are, getting all the way through to sales?
So I think, and I'm sure a lot of people listening have heard, the 95-5 rule, that like only 5% of your total like addressable market, or your TAM, if you will, um, is actually in market and like looking to buy software. So you kind of have to look at it, and I love looking at it through that lens. And we talk to our customers a lot about this, because when people are coming to Trust Radius and they're doing that kind of in-depth research, they're in market. There's no reason that you would go to Trust Radius and start reading all these reviews, comparing pricing, comparing features and capabilities, etc., unless you're actually trying to purchase software. And so when you think about the 95-5 rule, like your strategy should be very different for the 95% that you're trying to, influence and gain mind share from, versus the 5% that you're actually, to your point, trying to transact and get them into your sales cycle. And so, and that's really how I think about it as a marketer. And so I'll focus kind of on the 95% first, where this is really where you're kind of seeing the pendulum swing around. And you see this all over right now, as people talking about their brand and their reputation, because again, you're trying as a marketer to gain mind share. So when somebody from that 95% goes into the 5%, you're top of mind. They're looking at your website. They're reading reviews about you. They're looking for your pricing, right? You're on the short list. And that's the hardest part, I think, as every marketer should be thinking about, is how do I make the short list? Because when we survey buyers, and we have a bunch of buyer data, and we release our annual report around kind of buyer trends. And 75% of buyers said that they went with their first choice. And really, the only reason that they did the research was to convince the rest of the buying group of their first choice of technology.
But just to kind of put a pin on that, do you think
Yeah.
there's a psychological something there as to why they go with their first choice? Because it's the first impression, the first thing they land on. Then there's all of this testing in between. And then the last one is really not the one they want to go with. So then they remember everything from the first choice.
Yeah. And the number one, and the other thing that when buyers said, their number one most influential resource was their own prior experience.
Hmm.
So
With
people are
that technology. So that's something that they've already used before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so people, kind of going back to my previous point around how risk adverse people are and how skeptical they are, we're getting ready to release our annual report next month, and we're kind of sifting through the data and so forth. And so what will be really interesting is to kind of see how maybe that's potentially shifted. But people, like, again, because they want to, they're thinking about, okay, I've already used this at a previous company. I was successful with it. And, again, that kind of goes back to that ladders into brand as well, and your reputation. And so if you're making your customers successful, they're going to take you with them to the next company, because they want to align themselves to you. They want to align their careers to you. And so really thinking about that 95% and how you're building a brand and that reputation and that trust is super, super important, because again, when they move to that 5%, you want to make sure that you're making that short list.
Yeah, I like that. And I like how you talk about, as marketers, like, we travel. It's almost like our portfolio is our our tech stack, right? And the successes that we've had on it. But granted, one tech stack may work for one company versus another. That's a given. But I do like, for example, I think it's HubSpot that allows you to kind of buy into like this referral piece of the pie, where it's like, if you move from place to place, you as a marketer are able to get, a piece of that from, having folks sign on to it. So maybe there is something there that it's like, not necessarily like full rewarding, but how do these tech stacks maintain relationships with marketers, to continue the retention, and this is something that I'm just thinking about as you're talking, because I don't think a lot of tech companies do that from that standpoint because their audience is the marketer. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think it kind of goes back to like your, again, customer success, your customer marketing strategy, just your overall like customer experience strategy. And at the end of the day, your your happiest customers, and like that's what really you should be like modeling your whole like demand gen strategy for as well, right? Like your best customers should get your next best customers. And so wherever they may be, right? There's a lot of technology today that like helps you kind of track when people are moving to different roles, moving to different companies, and having a strategy around that, I think, is super important to maintain those like relationships. And I think there's like a smart way to do that, but you have to start at square one, which is making your customers successful. And I like, it sounds so simple and like a duh, but you'd be surprised of how many people, and I even think about my own tech stack where, the churn rate on SaaS these days is like companies are
Huge.
really fighting it. Yeah. And if you think about the rule of 40 and you have a leaky bucket, it's so difficult to outrun churn. And so really, I think a lot of our customers and people that I've been talking to in the industry are really starting to be like, how do we protect the base? How do we make sure that we're growing within the base? And it really just starts with, making sure you understand your customers' needs, making sure that, you're driving that adoption. Because if you think about in SaaS, it's all about adoption. And the usage of it. And people are even changing their pricing models to that kind of more consumption-based model, because the more that they can get people to use it and adopt it, and then the pricing also complements that, that's huge. And that's a big shift from where we've been.
Yeah, I like that because, as we talked about buying into a Rolls Royce versus a Toyota, if they do set up their pricing model based on usage, and where they're what percentage of the platform they're actually using, I mean that's a great shift within the tech stacks and the SaaS platforms. I love that a lot. You did touch a little bit about demand generation, and I wanted to dive in further into the stance of actionable demand generation with and strategies for growth in today's market, especially for a lot of companies are looking to really have fast growth. So talk to me a little bit about how you guys service that.
So I think that another strategy that is maybe not, it's almost like was it intrinsically known but not necessarily talked about a lot, is the word of mouth. You would be so surprised on how important word of mouth is. And I think what people don't talk about is, okay, what are people saying about your company when you're not in the room? And I was just at a conference the other day, and one of our partners was mentioned. There was like all these discussion groups, and one of our partners was mentioned in every single discussion. And every one of those people are going to now go and look up that partner and start, researching
Oh
them
yeah.
and figuring out the uses that it powers. And so this idea, and it sounds like one to one, right? And that doesn't scale. But I think that this word of mouth is so important, because people want to learn from their peers. I want to talk to other CMOs like me at um, a similar maybe stage company that I'm at, or the IT person wants to talk to the same person that's just like them, maybe at a different company. And so I think that when you are building out that demand gen strategy, how are you empowering this kind of word of mouth, and how are you going to do that at scale?
Yeah.
And I think where kind of trust radius fits in that is the scale piece. Is okay, great. Like I can't go to 15 different CMOs and figure out what they're doing, but I can go and read a bunch of reviews and what they're talking about and the different technologies, and what they found, the good, bad, and ugly of that. And so I think in your demand gen strategy, don't underestimate the value of word of mouth and how you're going to empower that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's totally great, and it's great that you guys are solving for it at that instance. Um, Simplifying marketing without sacrificing, and I want to talk to you a little bit about, what's actually worth focusing on, because I think, and maybe some of this stuff is going to come out of your reporting, so whatever you can share,
Mhm.
share. But it's at the lever of, I think it is this funnel as CMOs. And again, it's going back to conducting the symphony, right? And it is knowing where to pull and push the levers of, how do we focus on really truly what's working? I mean, I had a call just recently with a potential client today, and we were talking, and he said, we're doing so well in one channel, but there are so many other aspects that we could be growing in, right? But then again, it's like, well, if you're doing so well, why don't you push more budget into that, and then maybe focus on, if you're a company that goes after a multitude of different industries, what channel really works based on each industry, right? But I'd love to hear your insight, and what you guys do from a marketing standpoint to really pull those people in from the top of the funnel,
Mhm.
and really grow that, but keeping it simple, because again, it's simplicity and what actually wins.
Mhm. I think about it as like your what I guess like what your ultimate goal is. So, you talk to a lot of different marketers. We had a executive dinner the other night, and it's just great to hear from like all kind of points of view of what people are trying to do. We're trying to go global, we're trying to move up market, we're trying to move to a PLG model, we're trying to go back to the
All
sales
the ones.
model.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, it's just it totally there's so many things out there that you need to be doing. And so when I think about specifically around Trust Radius and like what we're trying to do, we have some really big competitors in this space, and we have to change perception of how you actually build trust and how you actually connect with your target buyers. And so our strategy in the most simplest format is content consumption. We need people reading and consuming our content, viewing it, listening to it, however they're consuming it, because we need to change perception, and we need to continue to build this idea of trust with both buyers and technology providers. And so when I think about my team and what we're doing is it's all about content creation, and it's all about that consistency and then the distribution of it. So we're like, great, here's our content strategy, here's who we're trying to talk to, here's here's the types of content that we're going to create, and here are the channel distribution of that. And it's very simple. And here, like, and what are the core themes that we're going to touch on that support our brand message out in market? And that's it. It doesn't get much simpler than that of how to
Yeah.
build a plan. Now, where I think marketers get caught up a little bit is like the performance metrics. Because I have to go into the board meeting and I have to say, you know, like with my CRO, we have a very like tight um, talk track of how we
Yeah.
talk about, our revenue and how we're driving and hitting those numbers. And so when we do that, it's very interesting because I don't ever really talk about anything marketing. I try not to use like any marketing jargon at all.
Yeah.
But for instance, like we classically sold to customer marketers, and we moved all of our marketing and messaging over to like the demand gen function. And so there's like a few key metrics where I'm like, look, we're expanding the marketable universe of DG contacts. So we actually have EG people to reach out to. We actually are engaging these people. They're inbounding. Here's how many meetings that we set with people within the demand gen function. We really want to be talking to executives. Here's all that. Like, so I really tried to think about how I'm talking about the marketing initiatives, but they're laddering into these overall company goals that we're trying to achieve, and then how that ultimately is driving revenue. And we have that succinct talk track with my CRO, and that's for our entire executive team and for the board as well. So in the most simplest format, it's like, don't overcomplicate the marketing planning and what you're doing. And when you're getting into that boardroom or you're talking to the rest of your executive team to get that buy-in, always be laddering it up into the overall
Mhm.
company objectives and what you're trying to do.
Yeah. I like that you talk about content, and you didn't go right to digital, because I think a lot of company owners, founders, CROs, whatever it is, they think traditional marketing, right? And I think,
Mhm.
and correct me if I'm wrong, as a CEO yourself, CMO yourself, we're really moving into this community-based decision making, because let's go back to some of the things, Allison, that you talked about, which is peer-to-peer referral, right? Trust. What has other people used? What have you seen success in that's going to bring me success? And so on and so forth. And you did kind of bring up the reviews, on sites and all that kind of stuff. This is so important from the customer journey standpoint of, people no longer say, okay, there are these 5 major companies that I want to take a look at. I'm going to get a demo from them and I'm going to spend time doing that. But rather, why don't I have conversation with my peers and people outside? And, this goes back to like, Google's messy middle of like how people really discover you to get into that platform. And I love the simplicity that you bring up in terms of content, because a lot of people forget about content and they think that it's a lot of time and it's not going to get me anywhere. Yes, correct. It is the top of the funnel, but it then can translate into something because you're building that core relationship, because this is B2B at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I think that, with the way content is going to be created in the future, and I was talking about this with at this conference that I mentioned earlier around kind of the commoditization of content with AI.
Yeah.
And so having original content, and somebody asked me like, what does original content mean? And I'm like, that,
Not
it
chat
is,
GPT.
yeah. And I was like, fair question. I totally
Yeah.
agree. I was like, I get that. And I was like, what I think original content is that it has your POV as a company. And I was like, the when you think about that type of content, like think about your industry. Okay, I'm in, manufacturing or whatever. And what are these like trends that are happening in the industry? And then how does your company have a point of view on that? How do you comment on that? Create content that does that, and that's what people want to consume. And so essentially, you're tying your brand to this thought leadership, but you're also making it super relevant about what's going on in your market. And really, that's how we build content at Trust Radius. We're like, what's going on in the in the B2B tech space, the world kind of our oyster, because it's so, there's so much that you can cover. But it's like, let's have a POV, let's have some personality that goes into that. Let's have a voice in this conversation. Um, and we're creating that content. And so that's what I mean by like original content. And I think also review, like your customers are the original content. If
Yeah.
you think about your customer voice, and I talk about this a lot where I'm like, that's something that your competitors can't copy. And with AI, like they can build a product just like yours. They can copy all of your messaging. They can, it's
Mhm.
going to be very interesting how that all plays out. And I just think that your customers and what they say about you, how they describe the use cases, how do they describe the capabilities and features that you, right, that you have, that that's original content and nobody else can copy that. And
Yeah.
so I think really leaning into like your point of view, what you have to say, your voice as a brand and your customer voice, and mirroring those two and creating that original content is really going to set people apart from their competitors.
Yeah, I mean, because also in the boom of ChatGPT, everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, I can print out like, a blog a day. This is so easy." But I mean, then what happened was, obviously the Microsoft and, the powers that be, are like, "No, no, no, we're not going to be Google's like, we're not going to scan your website because it's all AI generated and so on and so forth." So I do love, I think that original content is probably going to be like the next best thing, like as AI calms down, which it probably won't calm down. It's just going to maybe kind of plateau into, now there's just this intensity of, all these different platforms and AI, connectivities that are happening, that I think we're just going to figure out how to optimize, the usage of AI and connection to all these platforms. But you have brought up customers, and paying attention to that, which is an amazing segue into leveraging customers for insights and real-time feedback, because a lot of companies miss this, and a lot of companies make mistakes. I mean, we'll go to like a big debacle that happened with Sonos. If everybody's familiar with Sonos, the speaker system, where they, did an upgrade to their app, and then all of a sudden they had a bunch of angry, consumers, and a lot of people were let go at Sonos. So talk to me about the importance of feedback, and how we keep our ear to the ground as business owners, as marketers, which is so crucial, because why have you created a business if you're not going to listen to your customers?
I think it starts with culture. Like internally, your
I love
product
that.
team, it's really company culture.
Yeah.
And, you put, this idea of customer centricity and so forth, and putting the customers at the center, like it's a top down culture that you create within your company. So for all the executives out there, that it really starts with you. And so um, then once you create that type of culture, it's like, okay, great. How do we get these insights? And there's tons of ways that, right? There, your NPS score, getting, surveying your customers. Are actually a lot of our customers, what we've been doing is synthesizing their reviews to get that kind of sentiment analysis. And they're like, okay, great. How do I know, like, within there's so much information in all of these reviews, I can get a bunch of insights at scale, get that back to my product team. And so I think that you can start a customer advisory board. Like there's so many ways that you can do it, but it really starts with the culture of the company and willing to intake. So I remember early in my career, we started a cab, and uh, it was really like a networking and just trying to like schmooze and build relationships. We weren't taking a lot of that feedback and like our product team really actioning on it. And I like that was just a miss. I think that was a big miss by our team, but in that we had to change that culture over time. But the ability to like ingest the feedback and action on it is huge, because there's tons of ways that you can collect it, but there's nothing worse than as a customer and you're giving all of this feedback and you're spending time to do that. And you're obviously, if you're giving feedback, you're invested in the success of this company. And that should, right. There's like this kind of symbiotic relationship, because if that company does well and you've kind of
Yeah.
built, you've inserted into your tech stack, right? That's important that they're meeting your needs. And so being able to take that feedback, action on it, follow up on it, like is mission critical. And I think at Trust Radius, like we started our customer advisory board. We have a lot of feedback, sessions. A lot, like I think the most simple thing, and anyone that's a CMO or you're starting a new role and you're in a go to market function, win loss
Yeah.
interviews.
Yeah.
Why are you keeping customers? Why are they churning? Why did you lose the deal? Why did you win the deal? You should have like 3 to 4 bullet points for the reasons why across
Yeah.
those 4 things. And that's and then as a new executive or a new person at the company, that's the fastest way to learn.
Yeah. No, I like that. And I like that you talk about like ingesting the feedback, because maybe we just haven't put into perspective that we look at customer feedback as like, here, they're over here in terms of like the surveys we've collected, and that kind of thing. But I don't think we lump it into the data so much as like, this is hard data actually in terms of what somebody is telling you. And then what are the similarities and what are the differentiations? So I think we need to loop that in and actually consider it a KPI, a key performance indicator that becomes part of our chess moves.
Oh, and think about like it was interesting. We do our win loss interviews quarterly.
Yeah.
And the volume always kind of, depends. But there are things that you also have to be kind of honest with yourself and with your product team. Like there might be things that you're getting feedback on, and that's just not the strategic direction of the company, and that's okay. But that also helps you define your ICP, right? Because if you're getting you're getting all this feedback from like said customer, and you're like, that's not really where we're going as a corporate strategy, but this is where we're really winning in this vertical with this persona. And that's what we're really building to, because that's where we think the growth is going to happen. And so I think also, like, you don't have to take all like the feedback, you don't have to like pivot for every single customer. And I think a lot of people think like that. It's like, okay, we're going to get this feedback from our customers and we're going to make everybody happy. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think it's more about getting that customer feedback, ingesting it, and how is it either how are you adjusting or how are you confirming your corporate strategy or your business strategy?
Yes.
And so I think that's important. Like the mindset is not like, hey, we're just trying to make every customer happy, but you're actually trying to validate, adjust your business strategy.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think that that was a very valid and extremely important point, because it's not about taking your customer information and just running wild and saying, okay, John and Jane and so on, they like have conflicting, like, ideations of like, how we should move through as a business. But it's really, what is the through line? And kind of taking a pulse in terms of, what people are saying, what people are not saying. It's like what you just said, Allison, earlier, in terms of when you were just recently at an event and there was this one company that everybody was talking about, right? So, I mean, that in of itself is, what is the chatter that's happening outside of the offline world and the offline ecosphere when people are actually gathering, when it's most important from that peer-to-peer referral and that perspective. I love this. So let's talk role of CMO and dive a little deeper, because I know we touched a little bit, we talked about, it being the conductor of the symphony, but how it differs from marketing leadership in other industries, and what are the unique challenges today in the tech-driven environment?
As a CMO, I think that you can wear a lot of hats, and there's a lot of expectations of a CMO, and it's fluid, right? And I think with like a CRO, like revenue, right? There's sales, CS, very straightforward. You hit the number, you don't hit the number. There's a lot of performance management, and it's really easy because there's a number. And the same thing with like a CFO, right? There's numbers, and it's really simple. And so what marketers have been really good at over the last 15 years is creating these kind of numbers to ladder into. But what happens is it turned into very transactional, I think, for CMOs. Hey, we put $1 in, we want $5 out. And that isn't always the case, because again, going back to that 95-5 rule, there's a lot of stuff that you need to do for that in terms of your brand and your reputation. That's not $1 in, $5 out.
Yep.
And I think that's where marketers, we've kind of gotten ourselves into a rock and a hard place where you're talking to the board and you're talking to your CEO and you're trying to get buy-in for some of these programs that are not transactional. They're not these performance metrics that you're going to get. We can't, and I think every marketer hates the word of attribution, and everyone trying to understand what's working. And I think really what marketers and CMOs should be thinking about is, and you kind of talk about this with product, but it's the through line. So, you could do a lot of analysis across their deals. And so I've done this where you look at all the touch points and then you see, okay, what were the things that got them over the line? And, what got them into the sales cycle? What got them to take a meeting? And that's really, really hard to figure out, because going back full circle with the buyer's journey, it's not this linear thing, right? And it's not like, hey, they went to this webinar, the BDR followed up with them, we booked a meeting, and they bought it. That maybe happens,
Once in a lifetime.
once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And so I think that the more that marketers and just the CMO in general can talk about and I go back to this because it's just like talking about the programs that you're running and how that's supporting the business strategy and the business goals, and having that really tight talk track with your CEO or CRO, because what you see a lot of days is that marketing is just getting lumped under like a CRO, or like they have kind of interesting titles. And marketing, if you truly see it as a growth driver for your company and you support it as such, and you give marketing the space to do that, um, it's huge. And I think that's what a lot of CMOs are kind of grappling with right now. And that's why, it has the lowest tenure and all of the C-suite, because it's hard. And it's also, you're constantly balancing the short term versus the long term gains. And, I've been at Trust Radius for 3.5 years, and I'm just starting to see like what my vision was when I started 2.5 years ago come to fruition.
Yeah.
And so like you just have to like, you have to build that you have to figure out how to build that confidence. You have to figure out what are the metrics that matter to the team, and how do you talk about that? How do you keep, your team, the marketing team also in that mindset where it's like, we need to be laddering into the company objectives. We need to have, but they're still kind of like in the marketing metrics. They're looking at email open rates, and that's great. Like all of the marketers are looking at like their performance metrics, but how do you translate that for the rest of the company so they understand what marketing is doing?
Yeah.
And it's all kind of that dance that you have to manage as a CMO. And so, and I'm still learning that dance. I think it's a journey. It's not, what is it? It's about the journey, not the destination.
Yes.
Like, I don't think you ever really get there, but I think it's that dance that every CMO has to learn for themselves. And then how do they do that within the company that they're?
Yeah, well said. Because, and you talk about the tenure versus like a CEO or a CRO, because what's very unique about the marketing role and a CMO role is the challenges and the difficulties that we face with an up and down, motion as to how we're tweaking and working with the ways of how the environment and the consumer and the buying power continuously shifts along the way, and that it's not this one track where, like you said, the CRO is like, okay, these are my numbers. Are we hitting them? Are we not hitting them? And we are, and marketing and sales are responsible for hitting them. Not to get into too many analogies, but I always like to look at the marketing as, the centralized octopus, if you will, for a lack of a better term, of any company that really sits in the center. And we have tentacles in so many different departments, right? With the support of sales, but it's kind of like we're at the head and we are supporting sales. I mean, they go out and they can, farm, and get their leads, but there is an ability to be able to help them with that. What do you think is the biggest challenge with marketing today?
It's a great question. I think the biggest challenge for marketers today is 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 like, how do I say this? It's not about like fighting to have a seat at the table. It's not, they have to take off the marketing hat and they have to put on their company hat. And like nothing I do is for marketing's sake. It's like, if we in my team, I'm like, I'm like, you guys, we created this plan, we created this timeline, we created everything. If we need to scrap it, we can scrap it. Like,
Yeah.
you have to take your hat. I'm like, you guys, is this really hitting our business objectives? Are we really doing something that is worthwhile and helping us with our overall goals as a company? Now, I think that's really hard for marketers because, like, as a digital marketer, right, I have I want to make sure like my CPC is X, Y, and Z. I want to make sure I'm getting these ads out. And it gets very, very narrow, very, very quickly. And especially the way that, to your point, when we first started around like how narrow and specific marketing roles can be. And I think what happens is that people put that hat on and they can't get out of it, right?
Yeah.
It's like, take
Yeah.
that hat off, think about the company, think about what we're actually trying to do, because nothing should be done for like marketing's sake.
Yeah.
Everything needs to be laddering in to drive revenue for the company. And so I think that's a really, really big challenge for marketers because we love to talk shop. I could talk to a marketer and we can talk about, all the things, but at the end of the day, we need to put that company hat on. and we
Yeah.
need to think about how marketing is driving revenue.
Yeah, the better of the company. I love that. Allison, this has been great. And like you said, marketers can sit here and talk shop all day long. But I do believe that we got some great insight. I will tag your company as well as your LinkedIn so everybody can, get in touch if they need to, as well as the company. And, again, we're looking forward to this report coming out. I'm some juicy details. So if that becomes public, I'll make sure that we tag this also at the end of the podcast so that people can get their hands on the juicy details.
Yeah, definitely. And in marketing strategy, we like ungate it. It's just like broad
Perfect.
consumption. So
Amazing.
yeah,
It's free for all.
free for all.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Allison, for your time. This has been great and truly insightful.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.